Welcome to the Art of Living Free series with Anthony Silard, brought to you by theartoflivingfree.org. Today we explore Compassionate Companionship, Part 2.
Hello. Today's session will be on what I'm calling the socio-emotional antidote to the pandemic, which is compassionate companionship. So this is recognizing that many of us are feeling traumatized. There's a kind of collective traumatization in the world right now around the pandemic, around having more time indoors through quarantines to think through things and also let that kind of trauma sink in through rumination. And we're also feeling that no one's listening to us. Many of us feel that way. So, a little more about how to be a compassionate companion. So, one thing that's really fascinating from the research on post-traumatic growth by these two University of North Carolina psychologists, Lawrence Calhoun and Richard Tedeschi, is that in their studies, and a number of people have been researching this for 25 years, they found that distress that comes from trauma and the growth, the post-traumatic growth that can come from trauma, are independent of each other. So they lead to independent outcomes. So in other words, if you start to experience more growth because of your trauma, it doesn't mean you're going to experience less distress. Or if you start to experience a lot of distress, that doesn't mean you're not growing. In fact, sometimes we need to feel the distress to experience the growth. And so I think when you're interacting with a friend or a colleague or someone and getting them to share how they're feeling about what's going on in their lives right now, I think it's really important not to try to push them from distress and into growth, but allow them to express their distress and just listen. Sometimes they're going to hear. I mean, I tell you. I mean, I've done about 500 interviews with police and nonprofit staff who have been privy to just tremendous types of traumas that people have experienced. And the way I do the interviews is just listening, most of it. And sometimes horrific details that people are sharing, but they need to express that. They need to get it out to better understand it. And right now, for most people, it won't be so horrific, but for some people it will. Like a friend of mine who lost her father to COVID just last week. There's a lot of details that she wants to share, and it's not the easiest thing to listen to. But the interesting thing about it is that by being there, by being present, by being a compassionate companion, we also grow. So I learn from her. I learn from someone who's handling one of life's most challenging situations and how she does that. So one of the ways I think to be a compassionate companion is to be curious, to be genuinely curious about the other person, to also enact what Carl Rogers, who was the former head of the American Psychological Association, the founder of client-centered therapy, he called positive regard. Have a positive regard for the other person. So for them to open up, they need to feel like you really care about them. For them to trust you, that you're listening to them without judgment. You're not there with an agenda to get them to be like us. And we do this a lot, especially in family, right? With one of our parents, we're tired of listening, or one of our kids, we're tired of listening. So we try to push them to be like us, right? And to have it all figured out and move forward so we can all get on with our lives. It doesn't work. People go at their own pace. And I think a good image for that, I have a friend of mine from India, from Mumbai, and he shared that. I love this image. It's very, very kind of Hindu. But I love this image of a man who is sitting on a dock, and it's a beautiful sunset, and he's there fishing. He's got his fishing rod, and just sitting there on this dock by himself with this beautiful sunset, and he doesn't have a hook on his line. Right? And it's just that the process is the destination. The journey, is the destination. It's about the process, not about the outcomes. And so just being there, letting someone go at their own pace is an excellent way to help them through trauma. And I want to share, just being present. We often don't realize just how important that is. So when I really learned that, it wasn't through studying anything. It was through a trip to Sanborns, which is a department store in Querétaro in Mexico. My wife is from Querétaro, from Mexico, and we were there. And we're at this little restaurant that they have inside the department store, which is Sanborns. and so the larger store. And they had the little play area, think like the McDonald's kids play area with the slides and everything. So they had a little makeshift area like that. And it was behind a glass door and a glass wall where you could see everything. And this 7-year-old girl had come through the door, and somehow when she closed the door, this huge wood door, which was about 12 feet high, somehow her arm got stuck in the hinge between the door and the wall. And the door shut, and her arm was at this unnatural angle, and she's screaming bloody murder. And nobody knows what to do. And my wife points to her and tells me, look what's happening. And so I run over there, and and again, everyone's shell-shocked. And so I just start screaming to all the staff, like, come here, we need to get this door, we need to remove this door. And so you get now about 10 people come over. And I'm sitting there on the side of the door with her, holding her hand. And on the other side of the door is her father. So there's this natural obstacle, not natural, this door, this man-made obstacle that's in between her and her father. And I'm sitting there talking with her in Spanish, like, vas a estar bien, you're going to be fine. Like, oh, wow, eres muy fuerte, you're very strong, you're managing this. In the meantime, I'm also talking to a number of people about, okay, we have to get the door off, we have to take the hinges off, and we have to do this very slowly, because it will take her arm off if it moves too quickly. Because it's literally, there's not much margin for error in terms of getting the door off. And so fortunately, there was a guy there, and he had been a handyman. He was about 30, and he literally got up on a ladder, and he's up there taking the hinges off. We get it off very slowly, and the girl is fine. She reunites with her father. And when we were driving home, my wife, who's a psychologist, and studied a lot on trauma, was saying, you and her made a connection there, and neither of you will ever forget it. And that is compassionate companionship. We were connected, and I am sure I will never forget it. And I imagine she may not either. And that's the interesting thing, that when someone is experiencing, when we think about post-traumatic growth, and we think one of the outcomes within us, the interpersonal outcomes of post-traumatic growth, is that we approach relationships differently. We approach life differently. We appreciate life more, appreciate people more. One part of that is that if you are a compassionate companion with someone during a traumatic experience, such as this pandemic, that's an indelible imprint on both of your lives. There's what's called a relational identification. You identify, it's kind of like my wife and I, there's a part of my identity that is with her in our marriage that is different than my identity talking with you now, or talking with a friend, or with a parent or someone else. There's a special identity that's formed in a relationship. And when someone is with you during a traumatic experience, that relational identity is formed. And it can last a lifetime. So the last thing I'm going to share with you about how to be a compassionate companion and help someone through a traumatic experience is that you have to strike a very delicate balance between listening to distress and encouraging growth. So the vast majority of it is listening to distress and just letting, as I've already shared, just let someone get it off their chest. And as they're talking, as you're listening, you want to listen for times where they may share something that indicates that their worldview may be shifting. Their life philosophy, their core values or beliefs may be changing, transforming. And that's when you want to ask questions like, okay, so you said that during this pandemic, you're starting to think that these superficial relationships you had before don't matter as much. Tell me more about that. Let them talk more about it, and just point out, well, this is a really beautiful thing. It sounds like your values around how you approach relationships are changing on some level. And that's essentially trying to help them to recognize the opportunities for growth, for the post-traumatic growth. So this balance between listening to distress and encouraging growth, and being very delicate and sensitive about that. You're primarily listening, but there are moments where you sort of facilitate. Think of being a facilitator and help someone to realize like how they are becoming as a person, as Carl Rogers would put it, how they are changing and evolving as a holistic human being, and how they actually can, this is probably more evolved and down the road, but can experience some gratitude that this pandemic, rather than being a giant monster, has been a giant reset button for how you or they may want to live their lives differently.
Life offers us many challenges, and theartoflivingfree.org offers new ways of thinking so we can see these challenges from a new angle and overcome them. Whether it's Anthony Silard's free blog, video or podcast series, his book, Screened in: The Art of Living Free in the Digital Age, or personalized courses, theartoflivingfree.org will help you refine your life vision and then transform it into action. Find out more at theartoflivingfree.org.